All right. First of all, thank you for doing this interview with us,
You're welcome.
and thank you for your service. Um, could you give me your full name?
William H. West,
M.H. West, okay. And where were you born?
Modesttown, right here,
Okay.
mile up the road.
Did did you have any brothers or sisters?
One brother,
Okay. How old were you when you joined the Navy?
22,
What year was that?
1944, about April.
Uh, what were you doing before you joined the Navy?
I worked for the Newport News Shipbuilding Dry Dock Company. We were building aircraft carriers and repairing ships for the ships that were in port that belonged to Germany and Italy. At the end of the war, at the beginning of the war, they had been sabotaged, like using acetylene torches on the gearing systems, using sledgehammers on the gear boxes of cast iron, big cast iron casings, and we were repairing that and building battleship and aircraft carriers, and of course repairing ships that were damaged at Pearl Harbor. That's the main thing. I was a machinist, a lathe operator, and I, you know, we also built the Grand Coulee Dam hydraulic turbines, and the penstock that comes down from the water curls around the turbine, hydraulic turbine. There were 150,000 horsepower turbines, and the bolts that held the two sections of shafts together were about 4 feet long, 3 to 4 feet long, 7 inches in diameter, and they had an 1.25 inch hole through them. The bolts were machined to a size a little larger than the hole. Then the refrigerant was pumped in, the bolts were inserted, then allowed to come up to temperature, and they're there for good until you freeze them again. But those hydraulic turbines were quite a project from my standpoint. Each one section of the penstock, which feeds the water down to the turbine, occupied a whole freight car, and all that stuff was made in the shipyard. The castings and machine work and the shaft. The turbine sits on this level, and the generator is above it, and the shaft is vertical, and it's about. We also made the wicket gates that control the water flow through the turbine, and these wicket gates were about 6 feet long and 3 to 4 feet wide. They looked like an axe, really, with a shaft and that turned them. And I worked on those and other parts of it. Fitted bolts to hold the penstock together. Every bolt was fitted by hand. If you machine it, but then that doesn't really make it fit. So they use Prussian blue on it, and wherever it leaves a mark, they scrape by hand. So it's a tedious process, but it's very good. Works very well.
You mentioned about some of the ships that were damaged during Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
What did you have to do with those?
Well, repair whatever the damage was. If it was the props or the guns or we made new gun turrets. I remember right on my lathe was next to a wall, which was another building, and they had a 6-inch gun turret in there to be, and they welded on that for about 3 months, 6-inch thick armor, and filling in with hand weld is another tedious job. And they also worked on the barbettes, I guess you'd call them. And we built a turret rollers for the battleship Indiana, new battleship. I think Indiana was the name. And we built the recoil cylinders, which takes the shock of the recoil. They're huge, you know, this big and that thick. Almost nothing on a ship we didn't repair, really. I remember some of the Italian and German ships that were in port when the war started. We had to repair the damage, they sabotaged damage that the crews did. They'd taken acetylene torches and cut the herringbone gears and sledgehammers and broken the casings for these gear systems. We had to make all that new and put on the ships to make them seaworthy. And
What were you living in You were living in Newport News?
yes, I was. I was living at 328 45th Street, not far from. Well, the shipyard occupied the whole front of the town, really, and.
What was Newport News like? What was Newport News like during World War II?
Nothing like it is today. It was a busy place, and you could hear the small trains, engines that pull the stuff in the cars in the foundry where they made parts for ship, whatever part was needed. For instance, the penstocks on the hydraulic turbines for Grand Coulee Dam, there were castings. They did all that over across the railroad tracks from where I lived. But you could hear the engines all night running. And I remember one of the aircraft carriers that we were building, they decided to test the hydraulic elevator system with compressed air instead of oil or dry nitrogen. And compressed air at 3,000 pounds is not happy with grease and oil. The ratio of air to oil for that is small. Anyway, it exploded one of the elevator cylinders and killed some people. I don't know how many. I remember that, and we did just about everything. I remember when they replaced the 16-inch gun turrets on the Indiana. They had a 350-ton crane that they used to do that. And we made everything from big gate valves to all that kind of stuff. It's kind of hard to explain unless you ask me about a specific part. But there was not much on the ship mechanically that we didn't work on and replace, or if it's a new ship, new, of course.
So, did you enlist in the Navy, or were you drafted?
No, I was drafted. The shipyard kept getting deferments for me, for the workers that they could. And finally, the deferments ran out and I was drafted, which I didn't mind. because it made me feel a little better. And I went from there. When I left shipyard, I quit, of course, right then. I went to boot camp in Camp Perry in Williamsburg, which was a former CB training camp. The CBs were construction battalions of the Navy. They used them to construct airports and stuff like that. But they turned it into a boot camp when I was in there for. So that's where I got my boot training. During my stay there, my grandfather became ill, and they let me go home for a week. And he died while I was at home, and they gave me an extension to that. And after he was buried, I went back had to start boot camp over, which, didn't matter another week or two. But it was an experience.
What year did you go to boot camp?
April 1944.
Okay. And after you got out of boot camp, what was your first?
Went to a naval receiving station in Norfolk at the naval base. And from there, while there, I went to radar operator training school at the Cavalier Hotel in Virginia Beach. At that time, Virginia Beach was not a city. It was what it said, a beach. That was all. And the Cavalier Hotel stood out like a sore thumb. And I remember seeing on one of the doors $28 a day for the room, which I thought was astronomical at the time. So after that, I came back to the receiving station, and they put me and the rest of us on duty serving chow and that type of stuff. It wasn't long before the Guadalcanal came in off her cruise in 1944, and I was assigned to it as a radar operator. And when I went aboard, within about a week, they had change of command ceremony, and Captain, later Admiral Gallery, went to another job, and Captain B.C. McCaffrey became the skipper of the Guadalcanal, and he was on there a long time to me. I was on board ship 2 years, and I got aboard just as it came in from the cruise where they captured the U-505, and which didn't mean much to me then. I didn't know that capturing a ship was the first ship captured on the high seas by the Navy since 1815, and but I became acclimated pretty quickly, and I was put in V3 division, which was radar operators and communications. A V stands for air in the Navy. I don't know why that is. Like CVE means carrier, C, V, air, E, escort. Don't ask me how they came up with that. I don't know. But now the combat carriers are nuclear. They're CVNs. So then, after some time in port and going into the shipyard for some minor repairs and scraping the bottom and doing that stuff and repainting, we went on my first cruise with her, and we were up in the North Sea. I call it the North Sea, between Scotland and Greenland, and we ran into a bad storm up there, like I'd never hoped to see again. I remember I had to eat off the hanger deck sitting on the deck because we couldn't keep stuff on the tables. And the tables were not bolted down. They were, because below decks was aircraft spare parts like engines and wings and other parts that are required to repair planes that crash. And that lasted about a week. And we were going before the wind, as I say, same way the wind is blowing. And a wave caught us in the stern and almost broached. We rolled over 37 degrees, which is a lot in a carrier. And just about as far the opposite way when she rolled back. Scared the hell out of me. And but after that was over, we went to the Azores and Punta Delgada for a refueling, and after that we headed back to Norfolk. And it was, I learned a lot. I don't know how much good it does me, but I learned a lot.
What was Norfolk like during World War II?
Norfolk, well, it was, to me, big because I'm used to this locality, but it wasn't like it is today. You had to go by ferry from Norfolk to Portsmouth because the Norfolk Navy Yard is actually in Portsmouth. It's not in Norfolk. And so there were some wild times, and some of those guys were nuts.
Can you remember when Military Highway was being built?
Yeah, I can. That was it was built around for just what it said, military transportation, and there were no houses out there, and it was open country. And I remember they built a group of houses at near the end of Tidewater Drive. I'll use that then. They built all the chimneys first, which I'd never heard of. Usually the chimney's the last thing they put in a house, but they built a field full of chimneys and then built the houses around them. That was new to me. And Virginia Beach was just what it said, a beach. There was nothing there otherwise. It was just amazing what it is today.
Do you think that your training that you received prepared you very well for your time out at sea?
Yes, I think it was about all they could do, really. You operated actual radar, and you weren't aboard a ship, but at that time, the Germans were sinking ships in sight of the hotel that we were in, offshore, within 5 miles. They were. I remember that at the Naval Air Station, they were using a tractor to tow some kind of explosive charges. I don't know whether depth charges or what. And some of them exploded and killed some people and involved in it. That's what I remember.
So what were you feeling when your ship, when the Guadalcanal pulled out of Norfolk? What were you feeling?
What was I feeling? I was exhilarated. It was an experience for me. I was ready to go.
So when you returned home, where did you go then?
We came back to Norfolk, and we had to go into the Norfolk Naval Shipyard for repairs caused by the storm, like it ripped the flight deck up forward, split the I-beams, and damaged the anchor windlass. I don't know how it did that, but it did, and stuff like that. And they also painted the aviation fuel tanks on board ship, and that is a process that requires steaming the tanks for several days. That was not very much fun sleeping in there with that. So they run steam through these tanks for